Tokyo, Japan, March 1994. 17,000 fans packed into the Nippon Budokan Arena for what was supposed to be just another stop on Whitney Houston's world tour. The greatest voice of a generation was in peak form, her power and control absolutely flawless. But then, during the bridge of I Have Nothing, Whitney suddenly stopped singing mid-note. She stepped back from the microphone, squinted into the crowd, and stared at one specific person in the fifth row. Something in that woman's eyes had caught Whitney's attention. Something that made the superstar's blood run cold. What happened next would stop the entire concert, bring 17,000 people to complete silence, and prove that sometimes a stranger's voice can be the only thing standing between life and death. Because the woman Whitney was staring at had come to the concert with a suicide note in her pocket and a bottle of pills in her purse. She had planned every detail of her final night on Earth. But she hadn't planned on Whitney Houston seeing straight into her soul. If you want to witness the moment when music stopped being entertainment and became salvation, hit that subscribe button right now. This story will show you the invisible thread that connects us all. Her name was Akiko Tanaka, and she had exactly 4 hours left to live. At least, that was the plan. The 28-year-old translator had purchased her ticket to Whitney Houston's concert 3 months earlier, back when she still had hope, back when the world still felt like a place worth living in. But everything had changed since then. Her fiancé had called off their wedding just 2 weeks before the ceremony, admitting he had been having an affair with Akiko's younger sister. The betrayal was so complete, so devastating, that Akiko felt something break inside her that she knew would never heal. In Japanese culture, where shame and honor carry immense weight, Akiko felt she had lost everything that gave her life meaning. Her family had sided with her sister, suggesting that Akiko must have done something to drive her fiancé away. Her colleagues at work had begun treating her differently, whispering when she walked by, their pity more painful than any direct cruelty could have been. For 6 weeks, Akiko had been planning her death with the same meticulous attention to detail she brought to everything in her life. She had written letters to everyone she loved, though she wondered if any of them truly loved her back. She had organized all her personal documents, paid all her bills in advance, and even cleaned her small Tokyo apartment until it was spotless. She didn't want to leave a mess behind. But there was one thing Akiko wanted to experience before she died. She wanted to hear Whitney Houston sing live just one time. She had grown up listening to Whitney's music, finding comfort in that powerful voice during every difficult moment of her life. When her grandmother died, she played "I Will Always Love You" until the grief became bearable. When she was struggling through university exams, "Greatest Love of All" reminded her that she had value. And when her fiancé proposed, they had danced to "I Want to Dance with Somebody" in their small kitchen, laughing and dreaming of their future together. Whitney's voice had been the soundtrack to Akiko's entire adult life. It seemed fitting that it should be the last beautiful thing she would ever hear. The concert was scheduled for 7 in the evening. Akiko had planned to return home around 10, take the pills she had been collecting for weeks, and simply go to sleep while Whitney's voice played softly from her stereo. It seemed like a peaceful way to leave a world that had become too painful to endure. What Akiko didn't know was that Whitney Houston had a gift. Not just her voice, though that was extraordinary. Whitney had an almost supernatural ability to read emotion in people's faces. Friends and family had always marveled at how Whitney could walk into a room and immediately sense who was hurting, who needed comfort, who was hiding pain behind a smile. This ability came from Whitney's own struggles with pain and pressure. By 1994, Whitney was carrying burdens that her fans never saw. The constant pressure to be perfect, to maintain her image as America's sweetheart, was crushing her spirit. She was beginning to use substances to cope with the anxiety that came with fame, though the world wouldn't know the full extent of her struggles for many years. Behind the flawless performances and million-dollar smile, Whitney understood darkness intimately. She knew what it felt like to smile for cameras while dying inside. She knew the weight of carrying pain that nobody else could see. That night in Tokyo, as Whitney prepared for her concert, she was dealing with her own emotional turmoil. She had argued with her management about the grueling tour schedule, feeling like a product being sold rather than a human being creating art. She had spent an hour before the show crying in her dressing room, overwhelmed by the pressure and loneliness that came with being one of the most famous women in the world. Her vocal coach, surprised by Whitney's emotional state, had suggested canceling the show. But Whitney refused. Music was the only thing that made her feel alive, the only escape from the darkness that was beginning to consume her personal life. When Whitney walked onto the stage that night at Nippon Budokan, the roar of 17,000 fans should have lifted her spirits. The energy was electric, the love palpable. But as she moved through her opening songs, Whitney felt disconnected, as if she was watching herself perform from somewhere far away. She was going through the motions perfectly, but her heart wasn't fully present. Then came the moment that would change everything. Akiko Tanaka was sitting in the fifth row, center section, close enough to see Whitney's face clearly. She had chosen that seat deliberately, wanting her final memory to be as vivid as possible. As Whitney began singing "I Have Nothing," one of her most emotionally intense ballads, Akiko felt tears streaming down her face. The lyrics seemed written specifically for her pain. The song spoke of loving someone completely, of giving everything and having it not be enough. It was the story of Akiko's failed relationship, the story of her broken heart. Whitney was in the middle of the bridge, the part of the song where her voice typically soared to impossible heights, when something made her stop. She had been scanning the crowd as she always did, making eye contact with fans, trying to connect despite her emotional distance. But then her eyes landed on Akiko. The young woman's face was wet with tears, but that wasn't unusual at Whitney's concerts. People cried all the time, moved by the music and the moment. What caught Whitney's attention was something else, something in Akiko's eyes that she recognized immediately because she had seen it in her own mirror during her darkest moments. It was the look of someone saying goodbye. Whitney stopped singing mid-note. The band, confused, continued playing for a few bars before gradually falling silent. 17,000 people held their breath as Whitney stepped back from her microphone, her hand over her mouth, staring into the crowd. The massive video screens showed Whitney's face, confusion and concern written clearly across her features. Security immediately went on alert, thinking there might be a threat in the audience. Whitney's tour manager spoke urgently into his headset, trying to understand what was happening. But Whitney wasn't responding to anyone. She was completely focused on Akiko, who had frozen in her seat, suddenly aware that Whitney Houston was staring directly at her. The silence in the arena was absolute. You could hear people breathing, hear the soft hum of the sound equipment. Nobody understood what was happening, but everyone sensed it was something extraordinary. Whitney walked slowly to the edge of the stage, never breaking eye contact with Akiko. She gestured to security, then pointed to the young woman in the fifth row. What happened next had never occurred at a Whitney Houston concert before. Whitney spoke in her microphone, her voice soft, but carrying clearly through the massive venue. "I need everyone to stay calm and stay in your seats. I'm going to ask security to bring someone to the stage, and I need you all to trust me that this is important." The crowd murmured with confusion and curiosity. Akiko felt her heart racing as two security guards made their way to her row. She wanted to run, to disappear, but she was trapped. The people around her stepped aside as security reached her seat. One of the guards spoke gently in Japanese, asking her to come with them. Akiko shook her head, terrified and embarrassed, but the guard was insistent, explaining that Whitney had specifically requested her presence. As security escorted Akiko toward the stage, the entire arena watched in stunned silence. The video screens followed her journey, showing her tear-stained face and obvious distress. When she reached the front of the stage, Whitney knelt down, bringing herself to Akiko's eye level. For a long moment, Whitney just looked at Akiko. Then she spoke, her voice no longer amplified by the microphone, quiet enough that only Akiko and the security guards nearby could hear. "I see you," Whitney said in English, her voice thick with emotion. "I see what you're feeling right now." Akiko, who spoke fluent English, felt her legs weaken. How could Whitney possibly know? How could a stranger, a superstar who lived in a completely different world, see into her heart so clearly? Whitney continued, her eyes never leaving Akiko's face. "I don't know your story, but I know that look. I've seen it in my own mirror, and I need you to know something before you make any decisions tonight." The young translator was shaking now, tears flowing freely. Security guards stood close by, uncertain what was happening but prepared to act if needed. The thousands of fans in the arena could only watch and wonder, seeing this intimate moment play out but unable to hear the words being exchanged. "Whatever you're planning to do when you leave here tonight," Whitney said, her voice breaking slightly, "please wait. Just wait one day. Can you do that for me? Just one more day?" Akiko's eyes widened in shock. Whitney knew, somehow, impossibly, This woman she had never met knew exactly what she had been planning. The suicide note in her pocket suddenly felt like it was burning against her skin. The pills in her purse seemed to rattle, though that was impossible. Whitney stood up and spoke in her microphone so the entire arena could hear. I need to take a short break. This young woman and I need to talk for a few minutes. I promise we'll continue the show, but right now something more important than music is happening. The crowd, though confused, began applauding. They didn't understand what was occurring, but they trusted Whitney's instincts. Concert staff quickly set up a chair near the side of the stage, partially hidden from the audience's direct view. Whitney helped Akiko sit down, then pulled up another chair directly across from her. What followed was one of the most extraordinary conversations in concert history. With 17,000 people waiting patiently, with millions of dollars of tour production on hold, Whitney Houston sat knee to knee with a suicidal stranger and fought to save her life. Akiko, overwhelmed by the surreal nature of the situation, found herself telling Whitney everything. The failed engagement, the sister's betrayal, the family's rejection, the crushing weight of shame that had made death seem like the only escape. Whitney listened without interrupting, nodding with understanding, occasionally reaching out to squeeze Akiko's hand. When Akiko finished, her voice hoarse from crying, Whitney took a deep breath. 6 months ago, Whitney said quietly, I stood in my bathroom with a bottle of pills, trying to decide if I had the courage to take them all. I thought about how much easier it would be to just stop fighting, to just stop hurting. The arena had gone so quiet that people in the back rows could hear Whitney's words through the sound system. She was speaking loud enough now for everyone to hear, sharing her own darkness with thousands of strangers. I didn't take those pills, Whitney continued, her voice stronger now. You want to know why? Because I thought about all the people I hadn't met yet who might need to hear my voice. I thought about the lives that might be touched by my music in ways I couldn't imagine. And I thought about how my pain, if I could survive it, might help someone else survive theirs. She looked directly into Akiko's eyes. You are one of those people. You're the reason I didn't take those pills. Because you needed me to be here tonight, to see you, to tell you that your life matters. Your pain is real, but it's not permanent. And the world needs you in it, even if you can't see why right now. Akiko was sobbing so hard she could barely breathe. But these weren't the tears of despair she had been crying for weeks. These were different. These tears felt like something breaking open inside her, like poison being released from a wound. Whitney pulled Akiko into a hug, and the crowd watched as these two women, one famous beyond measure and one completely unknown, held each other and cried together. When they finally separated, Whitney took Akiko's hands in hers. I'm going to give you my personal assistant's phone number. She's going to check on you every single day. And if you ever feel like you felt tonight, if you ever think about ending your life, you're going to call that number. Promise me. Akiko nodded, unable to speak. Whitney reached into her pocket and pulled out a small notebook and pen. She wrote down a phone number, then added something else. When she handed the paper to Akiko, the young woman saw Whitney's phone number and a message written in English. You are loved. You matter. I see you. Whitney. Whitney helped Akiko back to her seat, then returned to center stage. She stood at the microphone for a long moment, gathering her thoughts. Then she addressed the crowd. Ladies and gentlemen, what you just witnessed was the only reason any of us are really here. Music isn't about entertainment. It's about connection. It's about reminding each other that we're not alone, that our pain is seen, and that there's always a reason to stay. She paused, emotion thick in her voice. Tonight, this beautiful woman reminded me why I sing. She reminded me that every person in this arena has a story, has pain, has battles they're fighting that nobody else can see. And sometimes the only thing that saves us is knowing that someone else sees our pain and cares about it. The applause that followed was different from any ovation Whitney had ever received. It wasn't for her voice or her fame. It was for her humanity, for her courage to stop a concert and save a life, for her willingness to share her own darkness to bring someone else into light. Whitney wiped tears from her eyes and smiled. Now, I'm going to sing Greatest Love of All for my new friend Akiko. And I want everyone in this arena to sing it with me, because we're all going to remind her and each other that we all have the power to survive our darkest nights. As Whitney began to sing, 17,000 voices joined hers, creating a wall of sound that felt like love made audible. Akiko, still shaking but no longer alone, sang through her tears, feeling the connection to thousands of strangers who were all telling her the same thing. Your life matters. Stay here. You are not alone. The concert continued for another hour, but everything had changed. The energy was different, deeper, more meaningful. Every person in that arena felt like they had witnessed something sacred, a moment when the distance between performer and audience dissolved completely. After the concert, Whitney insisted that Akiko be brought backstage. She introduced her to the entire band and crew, making sure everyone knew Akiko's name and story. She had her tour manager arrange for Akiko to receive professional counseling services, all expenses paid. And she made Akiko promise, one more time, to call if she ever felt that darkness returning. The next morning, Akiko woke up in her small Tokyo apartment, the suicide note still in her pocket, the pills still in her purse. But everything was different. She was different. She took the note and pills to the bathroom and flushed the pills down the toilet, watching them disappear. Then she tore up the suicide note and threw it away. Akiko called Whitney's assistant that afternoon, as she had promised. She called every day for 2 weeks, until the darkness began to lift and she felt steady enough to stand on her own. But the connection remained. Whitney's team ensured that Akiko received the help she needed, including therapy and support groups for people dealing with depression and suicidal thoughts. 5 years later, in 1999, Akiko attended another Whitney Houston concert, this time with a completely different purpose. She brought with her a letter and a gift. Security, remembering her from that extraordinary night in 1994, brought her backstage. When Whitney saw her, she didn't immediately recognize the healthy, smiling woman before her. But when Akiko reminded her of that night at Nippon Budokan, Whitney's eyes filled with tears. "You stayed," Whitney whispered, pulling Akiko into a hug. "You stayed." Akiko presented Whitney with a traditional Japanese artwork she had commissioned, depicting a lighthouse in a storm. The inscription, in both Japanese and English, read, "You are my lighthouse. You saved my life when I was drowning. Now I help others find their way home." She explained that she had trained as a counselor and now worked with a suicide prevention organization in Tokyo, specifically helping young women dealing with depression and relationship trauma. She had saved 17 lives in the past 3 years, inspired by the night Whitney Houston saved hers. Whitney kept that artwork in her home for the rest of her life. Friends who visited would ask about it, and Whitney would tell them about Akiko, about the night she stopped a concert to save a stranger's life, about how that moment had reminded her why her music mattered. The story of Whitney and Akiko spread slowly through the years, mostly by word of mouth. It became legendary among Whitney's fans, though many people assumed it was an exaggerated rumor. But those who were at Nippon Budokan that night knew the truth. They had witnessed the moment when Whitney Houston stopped being a superstar and became a lifesaver. When Whitney died in 2012, Akiko Tanaka flew from Tokyo to Los Angeles for the memorial service. She brought with her the piece of paper Whitney had given her 18 years earlier, now carefully preserved in a frame. The message was still clear. "You are loved. You matter. I see you." Akiko spoke briefly at the service, her voice steady despite her tears. Whitney Houston is celebrated for her voice, for her beauty, for her incredible talent. But I am here to tell you that her greatest gift was her ability to see people, truly see them, when they felt most invisible. She saw me when I had disappeared, even to myself. She gave me my life back. And because of her, I've been able to give 17 other people their lives back. That is Whitney's real legacy. Not the records sold or the awards won, but the lives saved and the light brought into darkness. The story of that night in Tokyo reminds us that sometimes the most important thing we can do is stop what we're doing and truly see another person's pain. Whitney Houston, at the height of her fame and dealing with her own struggles, chose to risk everything: her concert schedule, her image, her carefully controlled public persona, to save one stranger's life. And that one act of radical compassion created a ripple effect that continues to this day. Akiko's suicide prevention organization has now helped over 300 people choose life. Many of them have gone on to help others in turn. All because one night, Whitney Houston looked into a crowd and saw past the smile to the goodbye underneath. This incredible story shows us that we never know when our words or actions might save a life. We never know who in our orbit might be silently drowning, putting on a brave face while planning their final goodbye. Whitney's gift was her ability to see past the masks we all wear. But we all have that gift if we choose to use it. We all have the power to stop, to look, to really see another human being and say, "I see you, you matter, please stay." If you or someone you know is struggling with suicidal thoughts, please reach out for help. You matter. Your life has value. And somewhere, someone needs you to stay, even if you can't see them yet. Share this story with someone who needs to hear it. Hit that like button if Whitney's courage inspires you to look more closely at the people around you. And subscribe for more stories that remind us of our shared humanity and the power we all have to save each other. Until next time, remember, you are loved, you matter, and the world needs you in it.